right, and then we'll send out a link to the recording afterwards for everyone that registered. So I want to welcome you all and thank you for attending. We're really lucky to have Janet here. I've just been such a fan of the Montana Accessible Technology Policy. I think it's a great model to work from, so I'm excited to hear about how that process came about and what it was like to live it, and really to just get any advice that we can from Janet, as I know a lot of you are moving forward at very rapid paces to develop policy and procedures. So any advice that we can get, I think, is welcomed. So Janet, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, that sounds good. And rapid sounds like something that I recognize, at least from our experience too. Um, so as far as the goals today was just a little background of how the policy here came to be and what OCR may want to see in a policy, how it was crafted, who owns accessible technology, and then, since I can't believe this, it was 2.5 years ago that we had the resolution agreement, then a little bit of hindsight that maybe will be helpful. So just a little bit about my biases. I come from the IT camp, and so I've always thought that we're supposed to deal with all the messiness of things so that the campus community has it simple when it comes to technology. Hasn't always worked, but that's a goal. And I think it's important to recognize the complexities of this while presenting things a little more black and white, aim at low-hanging fruit. I've said repeatedly on this campus that support is what is needed in order to do some of this stuff. We work from where we've been and what we have, work in stages, and let people vent, and then bring them back to the educational benefits of this. And so, just a teeny bit more about me. The reason I was in this position is when I started in IT 30 years ago here on campus, somebody knew somehow that I was interested in disability work, and so they had me work with the DSS office, and I was volunteered for 2 hours a week for about 17 or 18 years and worked with the students there in supporting their assistive technology. So then when this came along, I just happened to know a little bit about those sides of the problem, so that has been really helpful. But again, everybody's experience, I think, is a little different, but just to give you an orientation, we received a complaint was filed in May of 2012. We received it in August. They pulled a task force together in September, and we worked, and then there was a civil suit that was thrown in, and then we met with the National Federation of the Blind a few times, and a resolution agreement was signed by our president on March 2014. And the cast of characters, I think, is probably important here. So the provost and the CIO were given a task from the president that translated to the EEO officer at that time, who later actually became University Legal Counsel, so that was an interesting switch there. But then we had representatives from the library, Student Affairs IT, which is distributed IT, our ADA team chair at the time, a person who was very interested in accessibility in our online department, Disability Services for Students had a rep, and Central IT was me. And so we met and talked about this all through the year 2013 and talked about policies and standards and what we wanted and how we were going to approach. And on this image, I have something called Tiger Teams. That meant when we had a question about captioning, we pulled people in from around campus that were doing any captioning and or where captioning would affect what they did as a department. We also worked closely with some groups on campus. We had tech partners, Staff Senate, Faculty Senate, and a Technology Associates group, which was largely administrative assistants. So we would meet with those groups and say, okay, here's what we're thinking so far, and get some feedback. And then as the resolution agreement was coming into play, we had a website. University Relations worked with us on broadcasting the information. we have a main hall. Our president and provost's office sent out some messages. We started working with departmental meetings and short courses to carry it forward. So that was kind of how that worked. Um, and even though the timeline that I have up here says, we started resolution agreement at a certain time or a self-study at a certain time, of course, all of that was going sort of simultaneously at times. One of our agreements was we would do a self-study, and from that would come up with a corrective action strategy. So those came into play very early on, and I have a typo on that slide, so don't notice that part. Um, but in addition, so the rapid part, we had very rapid deadlines. Um, we had to have a website in place when the resolution was signed. So by March 14th of 2014, we had one in place, and that had the information that we needed to have out there a bit. Then we had to have a procurement policy up on that website by May 1st, sorry. We had to have completed our little audit by June 30th, have the corrective action strategy listed by August, and I don't have that up on there. And then one of our first big compliance deadlines was straight text documents accessible and websites accessible by the end of the year. And that they actually had us a little earlier than that. And we said there was no way we could do it until the end of the year. Then right after that, follow on the heels, we had to have videos captioned, labs set up, textbooks going, and accessible clickers. So that was our kind of speediness on our part. And what the complaint had been included a number of different inaccessible things like classroom assignments on the learning management system, accessible documents, inaccessible videos, that were in Flash format, inaccessible course registration, just a number of issues. So we had a lot to deal with. And one of the changes in our assumptions was that before the complaint, we had been providing modifications and accommodations as needed, captioning if they're requested, that kind of thing. Just thinking that we had an accessibility clause in procurement, that would be fine. And all of those changed in that a student with a disability, the SWT there on the slide, had a right to an accessible environment so that they didn't have to request that all videos used for educational reasons especially must be captioned. And of course, we thought that was true for the website. And then all software procured had to be evaluated. And I didn't say this because I promised to get through and leave time for questions. But if you do have questions, go ahead and post them in chat, and I'll either stop and grab them or we'll talk at the end. And so our definition of accessibility is one thing that we've worked with on first, truthfully, because we wanted to know what we were aiming at. And this is a pretty standard one that you see now. It means that individuals with disabilities are able to independently acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services within the same time frame as individuals without disabilities with substantial equivalent ease of use. And then what I have up is just our policy. And truthfully, there is a distinction between policy and procedures, at least in our case. And so our policy is pretty straightforward, provides equal opportunity to its educational, administrative services, programs, and activities. It extends to the university's electronic and information technologies. And ensuring equal and effective electronic and information technology access is the responsibility of all university administrators, faculty, and staff. And then we listed the laws that would be in accordance with. So that's our policy, and that will stay pretty consistent. We may need to say something about the 508 refresh, but largely this will stay as it is. Okay, and then some of this is not all what we did, but how I would recommend doing it. And of course, we did spend a year evaluating, exploring, trying to figure out what it was that we wanted to respond to and how to respond to it. And during that time, we looked at what resources we had. We determined which categories we were going to look at, and that's something I get asked a lot. Why did you pick what you did? And some of it was what the complaint listed, and we selected standards, and sometimes that was interesting. And Joe, I'll answer the document remediation a little further out, but we did it internally. And what I would recommend, rather than looking at what what our procedures say of the specific categories, there's an excellent document done by EDUCAUSE about IT accessibility risk statements. And just a few of them I have up here. There's 19 total, but they say you're, you know, uh, encouraging risk if you have a failure to allocate sufficient resources and authority, failure to systematically and effectively monitor EIT content, failure to test EIT, content, electronic and information technology, for accessibility beyond automated testing or beyond VPAT statements. So just going with what's easy is, not sufficient in this case. So I think it's a great thing to look at and determine which things you wish to address on your campus, or which are the most crucial, and in what order. So you can look at that further, because to see all the 19 wouldn't make sense for me to read them all to you. But then the other thing is that our procedures are ones that we understand may change as we go along, because they are procedures and not policy. And ours are divided into web, instruction materials, documents, electronic media, software, hardware, and systems, and procurement. So the last two have kind of collapsed into the same issue, same thing. And we did not address kiosks very much, ATMs, digital signage, copiers. Copiers we did some, and emergency issues. And I would definitely now make sure that emergency procedures were a big part of accessibility testing, to make sure that, especially in that really important category, that we have it covered. And of course, once you figure out what categories you need to address, or how, either the campus or the culture views these and groups them, then the to look at what the standards are is important, and to know where you're aiming for sure. And with the 508 refresh, what I have showing on the slide are what's called the POUR standards, and I think this group would know that: perceivable, operable, usable, and robust, from the WCAG. And those, the 508 refresh on the other side, and I'm just pulling out the functional from section 31, and the 508 refresh has been done in order to bring it closer to WCAG standards 2.0 AA, and to make it for not just web. And so I think there's much less of a struggle right now about what standards to go with. This hasn't quite been adopted, but it's in the final committee, and assumedly should, within about 2 months, I think, be out there. So, and then for each category, we did a lot of, after we talked about the standards, what resources do we have? What processes are happening? Is there anybody doing this on campus? And then, of course, the funding gap, or what money will we need for that? So after we had gone through kind of all of that assessment, then we went ahead and started building the policy. And again, this is not, we used a grid that we got from the university, or California State University system, that talked some about some of the things that they had addressed, and we actually used some of that to begin with, and structured some of ours around that. But anymore, I think it'd be also good, once you know which categories to address, to go ahead and talk about how you're allocating things. And for example, the little table I have up there, it divides up an approach into, and I borrowed this from Penn State, triage, short-term and long-term. Those are important things to think about. Which things to deal with immediately, that also could be called low-hanging fruit, or triage, long-term, short-term. And then how to deal with, in each category, things that are created on the campus, things that are adopted by the campus, so third-party software, things that are archived, and I think the standard thing for archives is largely will make those accessible when we use them. But then, library archives is a whole other ballgame there. And then list who you think can do it, where the additional money may come from, and one of the things that I am asked a lot is how I'll go back. Sorry, I clicked too soon there. How we got people, and you'll see in a little bit, I have a slide of kind of our procedures that talked about, okay, this department will do this by a certain time. And it was a good question from Jess who said, how did you get people to buy into that? And when I look back at it, because I thought, wait a minute, what did we do? I realized that the people that were sitting in the room, that group that was called together, were largely representative of a lot of the places on campus where this would touch as far as procedure and having to change things. And so in that group, as we discussed it, we knew we were setting up what we would need to be responsible for. So I think that helped a lot. So, and then I have a thinking grid I'll show you here on the next, just to think through some of the different approaches for, okay, what are the stages of video, accessibility? What are the stages of PowerPoint accessibility or borrowed PDFs? If we're going to go at this kind of low-hanging fruit, what is that and what are the more advanced responses? And so just to kind of flesh out the highest level of compliance would be that an approach that is all students, all the time, everything's always accessible. For videos, that would be audio descriptions plus captioning and everything else. This is listing just the item that gets added in when they're at the highest level of compliance. And again, a discussion about PDFs that are owned, that we actually go in and edit them and make them to a high quality of tagging and order and all of that. PDFs that are borrowed, what do we do with those? When are we infringing on copyright and how your campus will view that? And some campuses don't use PDFs as much, so that helps with that. And then, of course, for software and hardware, the highest level would be evaluate and support everything. It's probably impossible, but a good goal. So those are just some of the ways to look at it, so that you're thinking about, okay, well, as we head out the door, we're going to make sure that Word documents are accessible. PDFs at least have text. And then down the line, we want to do these other additional steps. So I think it's just good to have kind of a sense of flow of that. So then this was required by the resolution agreement. We had a corrective action strategy, which was, like I said, listing the people who were going to do things. So this says, if you can, on the fourth column, it says responsible parties, and on the, I should read the columns across. The barriers and remediation is first. So, and this section was about accessibility policy. So a barrier remediation was to disseminate the policy on the accessibility website. We had a start date and then a planned completion date, July 2014, and who was responsible for doing that. And me was the answer. I'm the EITA coordinator. But to have that kind of flow was helpful. Like I said, that was mandated so they could look at us and make sure we were following these steps. But I think it would be helpful in general. And also clarifying to anybody on your website to understand the processes that you're going through. Okay. And again, the staff that evaluate procurement. And I do discuss procurement here a little bit because I know that's often a big topic. And I'm sharing on this slide the people part of this process, and that there were people I hadn't thought about that I could pull in. And the provost's office was largely the campus body that kind of supported this. But we had an IT communications officer that initially I didn't think of including. We had Relations, who office could advise us about how to communicate something, although they largely are to go out to the world. And then the graphics artists who volunteered and came and approached me to make a set of graphics to kind of identify it on campus, which was really nice. Maybe not necessary, but very nice touch. And we worked from the top down. We worked from the grassroots up. We tried to focus on strengths when we did this, and highlighted our successes, of course. And one thing, and this is more implementation than policy, but is the communication and of one consistent voice, because it was really hard to keep campus calm about certain things. And if a rumor started in one circle, it would take a lot of time to calm down that rumor. And so for a long time, we held our small group that was called the EITA Working Group. We held it to be the communicators, and we really worked even within that group at times to say, wait a minute, what are we saying about this, that, or the other? So we needed the consistency and the clarity about what we were doing also was really helpful. So people, because I had somebody say to me early on, I don't want to touch this document more than one time. And so having clarity about what our standards were going to be and what processes was really good. Not that we always had that, but that was good when we did. And then redundancy as far as communication with having stuff on the web, having videos, having short courses, having meetings with departments. So we did a lot of things in that way. Monitoring what happened, recently there was a case, not a case, but a letter filed with Berkeley, and the letter, it was the end of August this year, and it said, even though you have processes in place, you're not requiring faculty to use them. Even though you have video captioning available, it's not a integrated part of the process, and basically kind of dinged them on, yeah, you all sound fine and you have things in place, but you're not making people do it. So I think the monitoring piece is huge, and it's also, I think, a really hard thing to do, to know. So Joe's question about how do you handle document remediation, how do you know when it's being done if it's farmed out to each individual? And so some of those questions come up in just how to monitor it, and you have to monitor the plans that are happening, any products at the end, to know what percentage of documents are being created accessibly, what processes are working and working toward accessibility, and people's attitude and knowledge. And that's something that I'll show you sometime on the next slide, but that's something I think we're struggling with. And issues, because even as things develop, I just recently heard somebody reported that in one of the departments on campus, they said they actually overheard a faculty saying, no, I'm not going to make my PowerPoints available because then they'll have to be accessible, and I don't want to do that work. So things to work on. And one of the questions was, how do we monitor what people know? At least that was our question at this summer. And so we made a small, and it's not really an audit. At some point we'll do a big audit, but this is kind of a little assessment about where we stand on campus. So we're asking faculty and staff to answer these questions so that we can see what they know. And it's about 10 or 12 questions they have to answer online, and it records their answers and then lets them know if they were right or wrong. So where do we stand now? Did you all face a resistance, and how did you handle it? And of course, yes is the answer. And we have tried to look for champions of the cause in different departments and kind of share a campus story on the website about how they went ahead and it wasn't so hard. We've gone back to a couple of times to each of the campus groups, especially Faculty Senate, to talk about, here's some positive things, and I'll show that a little later. This is really a good thing. We're all in this together. It's not as hard as you think. And also, when my idea of we need to provide support, I'm able to go through the things they have to do and say, but here's the two that you have to do yourself. The rest we have support for. And we'll talk about how we approach the procurement in just a minute, and then how did you track online instructional materials? And that one has been a bit of an issue because it's hard. They can post things in their courses, and we don't have an exact process on that. So we're working on that. And again, I answered how involved were the parties in defining the timeline? Well, we were the people who made the decisions, who were actually putting ourselves in the hot seat of, okay, we'll support this. So currently, we also developed accessible technology services, and here in IT, and then added 2 people from disability services, our alternative formats person, our assistive technology person. And we've used our budget largely for temporary workers um, because we needed people who can assess and who can work on, the first initial push to assess websites. Sorry. Um, and our working group had been such a working group for so long that when we hit the end of last year and some of this year, we were just there was a lot of work, and it kind of switched over to where the department, the Accessible Technology Services Department, kind of took that over, and so the committee's been more just kind of coasting a bit and talking about how we will assess where we stand and that kind of thing. But we just got approved to become an official committee, and I think that'll be good. So that should be happening shortly, and it's largely with the same, not the same group of people per se, but at least kind of institutionalizing the idea that this set of services and technical people do need to be involved, along with including some faculty. We've done that spontaneously, but now it's a part of the thing. Um, Struggling for money has been an issue, so some regrets that we had to struggle so long for money. Also, that when we wanted people to send out messages saying you have to do blah blah blah, um, we had a harder time getting that. I think that would have been very helpful. We felt at first that we couldn't go around and just focus on individuals, and yet I also think that anytime we've gone in departments, that's really helped to hear what they have to say and to spread the information. Um, and then embedding, and that's the last kind of stage, because I think you're at the point of writing policies, and that can feel overwhelming. But then what I think is important is to find ways to keep moving it into the culture more and more. And that was actually one of the EDUCAUSE comments, that if you fail to create an accessibility culture, that can be a risk point. So we've decided to do an annual really light assessment. And you saw a little bit of that. We continue our services, but kind of brand them a little differently. And this says, I have a little visual up here of we're providing digital catering, and so we'll come to your office and listen to you. We'll offer coffee chats, and we'll do open labs where people can come and ask questions. And in all of these cases, we're catering to your discipline and your stomach, and we have a picture of brownies there. And each year going wider and deeper on each of these categories, just kind of moving into more like the first year we got a lot of pushback on documents that had multiple alt tags, and so we kind of were gentle on that. But now we're saying, okay, that we need to circle back and let's focus on alt tags. So we also did a certification process, and it seems to be something happening on this campus a lot. We have several different activities that are focusing on certification of different ways, and I think it's a way for staff to kind of feel that they can prove their worth. We're having some financial questions, so it's one way to show you're needed. Anyway, so we had certification, and people can work through that. The other thing, and I'll just talk, I'm kind of running out of time here, but I'll talk real quick about this, of just focusing on the positive, trying to emphasize that this is all about education for those who are looking out for getting more people to register here and to come here, that any accessibility efforts on the website help search engine optimization. We get a really nice consistent look and feel if people use our accessible templates, and there's a little more control over content when we're using them. When we use instructional materials that are accessible, professors can trust and know and have a consistent environment as we work on the instructional materials environments like online, and they can focus on the content, and students especially can have a consistent environment if we're more standardized. So we talk a lot too about how when you use the heading styles in Word, that actually there's a huge benefit for the authors, and so that's one I lean on a lot. And I'll also work with the idea that alt tagging means that professors are thinking about why they put the image in there and maybe not just putting in fluff images, and that a number of our students, 400 of our 1,200 students use some sort of screen reading option, not the really deep one. But these are issues that are helpful to all of those students. And of course, captioning, just how many people are using it. You can watch in multiple environments. We have people with lowered hearing ability overall. There may be students that really benefit from the two inputs, international students. And again, for someone, I ran a help desk for a while on campus, and if we have accessible software, it does help us also look at, are we using 6 different kinds of one category of software, and maybe we don't need to, and we can consolidate and collaborate and save on costs and have better consistency. So, and I also, when I feel it's a good moment, talk about how we can actually seed change with accessibility initiatives, with accreditation, focusing on student design and learning, and international type of activities. So all of those are good. Accessibility can be a launching point for that. So then procurement. And I won't do too much on the history because we're out close to time, but this was a struggle. We built it as we went along because we had like 7 weeks to get it ready, and so we've kind of restructured it as we go along some. We initially started with the initial committee kind of working together on reviewing stuff, and that of course bogged down pretty quickly. But we did use an existing process in procurement where things over a certain amount had to go through this process. That means our resolution agreement, though, says everything has to be reviewed. So we added periodic audits of things that we could just grab after the fact. And we still have people on campus who have ability to order things without having to go through processes, and that is a constant thorn in my side because I keep hearing of things that happen without having been able to look at it. So, but we devised our own system, again based a little bit on the California State University system, and developed the 508 standards in kind of what we call a roadmap. So we can delete these rows. I'm showing rows in a grid on a table. That we have multiple pages of this table because it's all of the 508 standards. And I actually put it so it links to the WCAG standard too. But if these things are met, they're satisfied, supported by the software, we just delete the column, and it makes it easy to fill these out. And our focus has been on the equally effective alternative access. We do have a mandate, that we don't purchase anything that's accessible. And we started from the beginning using something called conditional use, where it was either a category where we knew there was not a lot of accessible competitors, those kind of things. So we have we're able to kind of go into that a little more soft than our resolution agreement sounded like. And the Department of Ed, Office of Civil Rights, has looked over what we said and has let us do this. So it's been 2.5 years, so I think we're fine on that. But and we're starting to get a little harsher on some stuff. But again, our focus has been largely on what are equally effective alternative accesses, or is it a complete barrier? We come down and we're not really exempting things. We have another sheet on our roadmap that has comments from us and then the determination by the CIO. And what I have up there says exempt from review, and we tend to see that as more deferred for review because 1 or 2 people are using it, and we would tend to look at it more if it was more people and if it was academic versus administrative. But we do flip around, and something we may not have reviewed the first time and given conditional to, we're starting to do more of that now. Recommended for purchaser use, whether it's conditional use, recommended for an exception. In that case, it goes to the president, or denied, and then the CIO gets it and says what he thinks about it. So, so that's kind of a real quick overview. And I did go longer than I said, so I apologize about that. But are there other questions? I will start to answer Joe's, but please type in any that you have. And so Joe's first question was, how do you handle document remediation? Internally, hire out. So we had over in our disability service office and now in my department, accessible technology services, we had an individual who did document remediation alternative formats for students. So initially, we did utilize her for PDFs that really needed to be polished, but our view overall has been okay, everybody makes documents. If we're dealing with remediating them more than we are with producing them, we'll just never win this game. So our focus has been at first, the big push was just on teaching everybody how to make them accessible from the start. And so up to now, though, we've remediated them ourselves when needed. Um, and then Joe also asked, who would be the staff that would evaluate procurement items? Okay, how were they trained? So like I said, we started because as a group, the procurement piece came first, and we weren't experienced. We were kind of creating a process. Nobody else we'd found at that point was mandated to evaluate everything. Um, so we met as a group and went through the processes, a couple of us that are technical, and compared each other. We did some training to our IT staff that actually develops software in-house at times. But how they were trained, I hate to say, is just sort of ground level. I don't know how to say that. We would work with software, compare it to the 508 standards. And at first we were just going in there and testing, whichever pages of the software came up. And then when we tried to match it to the grid, we're like, wait a minute here. We didn't do this organized. We need to do it a little better. And so at this point, we have two different individuals, well, three, who use assistive technology to test. One of them is our primary person and uses a screen reader and kind of coordinates that. But there's a number of us involved with doing it at times. And there's been a discussion recently about the government trusted tester program and trying to get that moved over into higher ed. And so I can get information if anybody hasn't heard about that. And I think it'd be one by one we'd have to do that now. And I think the training's about 40 hours. You can do it online. But that may be a way we could get more standardization. And then Tacoma asked, I'm missing. Did you use any website auditing software? We did. We looked and thought about purchasing some of the software, but literally going in. So the resolution agreement was signed in March. I didn't know I had any budget at all. I just had one part-time staff member at that point, and some money for student captioners. So I didn't have any money until October. So at that point, we had started to use somebody in the web group to do some of the accessibility auditing. And of course, we use the automated ones first, and then double check to see if we agree with what the automated testing said. Currently, we are installing a copy of the FAE software, which is open source, and going to set up our own server and do it that way. So we have a cheaper but consistent way to store the records, the reports, and give them back to campus. Given limited funding and the extra work involved, how did you get faculty buy-in? Well, I have to admit that I'm not absolutely positive I can say that we got faculty buy-in yet. Definitely, I have faculty that on this campus that talk about this a lot and who are good examples of that. But we have done a lot of departmental meetings. So from the start, and even now I'm kind of circling back and asking again to go to faculty departmental meetings. And a lot of times initially that meant that I had 30 minutes or more of pretty upset questioning, and then was able to say my standard line of, here's the two things you need to focus on: sending us your videos if you want them captioned, and you need, the one thing you really need to focus on is documents. And so I think it helped to be able to have that kind of focused approach. And, with student captioning, we were able, this is a really sad fact, but because of student wages, we were able to have captioning done here without sending it out for a long time. Now we send some out, but because we pay students less than they pay them in the big cities, I guess. Um, and how did you prioritize which documents on the web to remediate and number of downloads? I'm thinking about that, but I went ahead and our server person ran a report of every single Word doc and PDF on the website, and we just started. We would look at because the report came out by web subdirectories. We were able to say, okay, here's cut and paste. This these are ones that are a problem, or we need you to double check. And we haven't. I can't say that we yet have anything that's checked every single document. Um, and I'm just 2 days ago I sent something to somebody and said, hey, this doesn't, this isn't accessible. So, and a good question about do you have a process for reviewing courses in the learning management system? We have a very committed person who can do half of her time accessibility work over in the Online, and it's our online learning management. And she works with them when she gets somebody who's developing a course, but there's a lot of faculty who have had access to the learning management system for forever and have their courses in there forever. And so as she can, she'll go back and look at it. But we work with Moodle Rooms, and they have just purchased something called Ally, and so that is going to now be in there. And I think I forget when she said, and so that will be able to do some checking because that really has been an issue that we know we haven't been able to check all of that. How much work is expected? Oh, I wish we could offer faculty stipends. What we do more than anything is offer faculty support. So we're doing closed captioning for them. We'll help with documents. I had one faculty member who was extremely negative, and I offered to do her courses, which in our department, and it took a lot of time, and it was really interesting. But in the end, her students asked her if we could have a workshop because they thought it was so interesting. So we had a bunch of students in there, and they were working on her her PowerPoints, as I'm explaining what the principles were. So that was kind of a neat way to get it to work. Yes, I agree. There's a comment here. If you didn't get full faculty buy-in, how are you able to say you were compliant? And I've heard this repeatedly, that when if you have an entire campus to deal with, and you need to say every single one of the papers, every single one of the courses, every single one of the videos is compliant. It it's hard to, that is probably never going to be a true statement because somebody could be sitting somewhere typing up something and not thinking about it right at that moment. So I think what we've always said is, here's what we're doing, here's what we have done, here's what we're continuing to do, and our policy is that way. We've got as many things set in place as possible, and we're just continuing to work on it. And I agree, it makes me nervous at times. Yeah, and I agree with Kelly. Compliance is a journey, not really a destination. Because one of the problems is with technology, it's always going to change, and then the interface with assistive technology and other parts of technology will change. So I do think it's an issue. But like I said, I've heard from a number of different campuses that if we're showing good faith and working hard at this, that usually it's understood, although, the Berkeley thing has made me nervous and has caused me to cycle back and spend less time helping with captioning review and focusing more on getting back out on campus and saying, guys, what's happening? Where are we standing? Um, so Olympic, is your office involved in the accessibility of technology with respect to business processes in HR? Yes, we hired a student this last summer who spent his entire time focused on the HR website and documents and working with those, just because we felt that was such a central place to pay attention to. And we're in meetings to talk about what a new process when we're contracts as they go through the university, um, being part of that process. And it's constant vigilance. I heard somebody in my department is setting up a demonstration lab upstairs that I hadn't heard about to show different classroom technology, and I had to sidle over to the person and say, wait a minute here, please let me know everything you're putting in there. Let's not bring stuff on that's not compliant. So, maybe it's because we're a small campus, somewhat small, that we're able to do it this way. But the personal contact and the connection and convincing or making it personal somehow, because that in talking to a number of different people and presenting down at Accessing Higher Ground and talking to WebAIM folk about this topic, how do we convince people this is important? And I think making it personal somehow, however we do it, seems to be one way that people do kind of buy in. And if not making it personal, making it educational. This is truly about full access for people, and there's going to be individuals who discover the benefits of all of this without knowing that they needed it. So anyway, that's kind of been our approach. Are there other questions? Certainly. And if you have any questions, my contact information is up there. And I'm really glad I've met a couple of you from coming around to campuses, and glad to help in any way I can. So, because it's kind of an overwhelming topic. So if you have any questions, let me know.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jan. And I just put a note in there for people not to leave yet. Because if you attended my previous webinar, then I have an activity for you. So let me just get my slide up on the screen, and I will send Janet's email out with the recording of this webinar to everyone that registered.
And the PowerPoint too.
And the PowerPoint, yes. Yeah, thank you so much, Janet. So again, I'd like to do a little survey since a lot of you are in your college groups. Once again, I really want you to kind of not just leave the room once this webinar ends, but use this as an opportunity to talk together and reflect on yes, I'll put the link in the chat, reflect on what Janet said, and kind of what lessons can be taken away from her experience, and kind of what's going on at Montana, the lessons that they've learned. So again, the objective of the survey is to help Cato, the Committee for Accessible Technology Oversight, identify areas to offer the colleges additional support, resources, and guidance. And part of doing that work is just figuring out where the colleges are at. So I know one of the first questions on this survey is, do you have a policy yet? And I'm not asking it with that tone. I probably shouldn't have just said that with that tone, because we understand if you're still working on it, if it hasn't quite come together just yet. We're not judging, I promise. But instead, we're just curious to find out what those challenges are and where you are in that conversation. So again, as a group, we'd like for you to kind of identify answers to the questions. Chat through those, and maybe you need some time before you can even craft an answer or figure out what the answer is, and again, that's fine. And then just delegate one person to complete that survey online. So we only need one from each school, and the link is in the chat, but I'll also send that out to with all of the webinar materials as well. And then what I'm doing is I'm actually summarizing the survey responses. I'm not calling out college names at all, but instead trying to kind of paint the picture of what's going on in our system. Because when I talk to people, a lot of you are asking, what are the other colleges doing? So when it comes to the coordinator role, a lot of people are wondering where does that role reside, in which office? So this helps me to have better answers or more accurate answers to respond to those questions. So we'll be distributing the survey, like the summaries of the survey results, through the councils and commissions, to start there. And in part because it helps, let's say if library looks at the results and feels as though they were underrepresented in their involvement, that's a really great opportunity for the Library Leadership Council to have a talk about that, and to talk about what their role is moving forward with accessibility. So feel free to holler if you have any questions about the survey or the webinars, or if you just want to chat with me. I'm always happy to chat. And to hit on a few things that were brought up, as I mentioned in the chat, we are trying the pilot Ally, and I'll keep, at least through ELC, I'll keep you all informed as to when that kind of takes off. We're running into some obstacles. And then we're also looking at like a benchmarking tool, something that will help with that process of self-study, to figure out, as Janet talked about, that was part of the resolution agreement for Montana. And so I think that's a really great way to kind of look at what are the things that you all have already accomplished and achieved at the college, and what are areas where you might need a little bit more work. So I think something like a self-study could be helpful with that. So as always, more to come. And that group that's looking at the Trusted Tester program, I'm on that list. So as soon as I hear anything more, I was just talking to someone who's on that team yesterday, then I will share that information out, because it would be, I think, really great for a system like ours to have a standard process of evaluation, so that we aren't all doing the same thing 34 times. So as always, more to come, and thank you so much for your participation and attendance in this webinar. And Janet, thank you again for taking the time to do this for us and to share your expertise and wisdom. To have someone who's been through this and survived, to ask questions of. So thank you.